Hello, it's Erich. Come on here. I think I'm live now. Welcome to Matters of the Soul. It is lekker to spend time with you. Lekker is the Afrikaans word for something is very pleasant, and I think you would know it. Okay, lekker, lekker, lekker. So tonight we're talking about a lively topic, and that is couples and fighting, communication gone wrong. So tonight we're talking about how to fight fairly with your spouse. And in the description I said how to have a proper fight. So how to fight a clean fight. Um, so I'm going to outline some rules for this wrestling match tonight. Um if you don't wrestle properly, then you won't have other wrestlings happening. Okay, that's a couple's joke. It's a flow enetjie. Okay, so it's a weak joke. Okay, any case, but let me get serious now. Um, last week I spoke about couples and communication. So I laid the foundation of what we're talking about tonight. So if you haven't seen that, please go and check out the Facebook tab under Matters of the Soul, like where you're now, and go and check out the video tab there, and all the videos are there, and also on our YouTube channel um, there at Matters of the Soul. Okay, so I am also going to do this in a workshop soon in Pretoria, South Africa, the 18th of February. It'll be a one-day workshop, and then later on the 18th of March, I think. So I'll have Fair Fighting 1 and Fair Fighting 2, and I've done that with great success in the past, and people enjoyed it, and it was helpful for them. So if you want to come and attend that, and you are in Pretoria or in South Africa, or if you want to fly from somewhere far away, you're welcome to do that. It will be an honor. So please do join us, and I won't break your bank in the process. But I think I'll ask just something, just must live too. Okay, so and this process here, fair fighting, I'm also planning to do some online, uh, you know, um, workshops or whatever training. Okay, so let's have a look at fair fighting. Um, let me share something from my own relationship with Elsie. So we've all been married 22.5 years, and it has not been without its moments of fighting. Although we do have a friendly, courteous relationship, um, we have the situation that we now I've got family calling me in the background because we have generators running, and I think there might be a problem. There we go. All right, that was the generator going over to Escom. Okay, Escom. Thank you, Escom. You're back for a while. Okay. Any case, so we're it's successful. We're still here. Okay, so the in this 22.5 years, yes, we did have some fights, and we had some interesting conflicts. And one of our worst fights was in Paris, France. We went there for the weekend. We lived in the UK, and we took the Eurostar, and we went to France, and it was such a highlight. We're going to go there, and that weekend was just horrible with lots of fighting. It was just, I don't know, we both were so oversensitive and emotional, and we just couldn't negotiate properly, and we were just edgy all the time. And we actually went later on and did that weekend over. We just said no, we're going to have a rerun. That was a flop. Okay, and then we did have some serious conflict 11 years into our relationship, and I'm sharing these things with Elsie's permission, where we actually had a crossroads. So we had to then dig deep and delve deep and figure out where the communication differences or the problems lie, and why I'm sitting with resentment and she's frustrated sometimes. What is going on? So that's where we started really figuring out what is going on. And I think the process of learning how to communicate and how to fight fairly took years, and it took lots of introspection and personal growth. And today I've arrived. Um, So today we're still growing in that area, but we are reaping benefits. So and the fruit of years of um, inputs and years of trial and error. So there's hope if you're stuck, and there's hope if you have tried this and it's failed, and you've been to people and it's not worked out. There is hope. So, and the hope lies in I think it twofold. The one hand is there's a spiritual hope that the Lord is good and He's greater than you. He's got more wisdom. He understands things better than you. He knows everything, so he knows who's at fault really and who's not. He knows what your share is, what your partner's share is. He knows what's going on. He knows whether you're aligned with him or not. So in growing in that relationship, that definitely offers hope, and it changes your heart and your mind towards your partner too. And then personal growth in another sense, because the spiritual growth is obviously also personal growth. But then the other side of personal growth is also the having the willingness to also practice and to go through trial and error, and to read up books and to listen to these great programs as you're doing now. So I'm preaching to the people who are in the church. So I'm glad you're listening here. So don't worry, you're already learning. So the idea is to grow and to know that even both of you, that you will find and you will grow to understand each other better and to communicate more effectively over time if you work at it. Now we went to couples therapy with a psychologist, and it wasn't a shame. It actually was very helpful. So the theory became more and more real there, because sometimes things are just too close and too personal to. I mean, I couldn't really see my share fully because I was emotional. Okay, so conflict between the two of you, you can resolve it, but it isn't easy. And if you're really stuck in fighting, you do need help. Then don't try to just figure it out on your own. It it's always better. Now you will go to help, and if you don't go with an open heart and a willingness to work at the process, you might get stuck in the process and blame the therapist, and that just shows the pattern is just perpetuating that you're blaming the therapist. So if you're at therapist number 7 and you're still blaming the therapists and they're also useless, then you must go and recheck why what's happening there. The common denominator is not the therapist. Okay, so but that's not you, because you're listening to this program because you want to grow. Okay, so you want to find out how to fight cleanly and how to fight less probably. So we are not fighting as much as we used to. The first 2 years were quite horrid. We were both immature and young, and although we were sincere and Christians and we really tried, we struggled and fights and took like a whole weekend to sort something out. Yes, like that was terrible. Now it takes, and I'm honest now, it can take the 5 minutes to, wow, I think 10 minutes if it's really bad, like half an hour of talking, like really. That's where we have to take like time out, you know. Why? If you go the extra mile to learn the nitty-gritties of what to say and how to say it and what not to say, and the fine-tuning, if you're willing to do that, then what you do eventually is you sidestep a whole bunch of like woods, and you don't get lost in those woods and in the mud and in all the difficult terrain, the mountainous areas. You just really you follow the correct path, and it's easier. I'm not saying it's going to be easy always, but once you've learned the skill, it really is easy. It is not just worth it, it is super worth it. So if you put into practice what I'm teaching you now, you might initially feel like you are talking like somebody silly. You're acting or whatever. You don't feel sincere. People say to me, but that's not natural. And that feels so contrived. Well, initially, yes, it does feel like that because you're learning another language. So, because you're not talking in your own language, you know. So you're learning another language. I'm trying to learn French this year. My goodness, it's, French is difficult for an Afrikaans guy, man. Okay, but I'm trying, ne? Any case, but gee, the language confuses me and all those things, and it's le, la, whatever. Okay, so and I am making progress, but it's just not easy. So it's the same here. Is it worth it? Yes, I think for a couple, I mean, marriage is one of the greatest relationships you'll ever have on earth with another human being. I think the most intimate, so it is worth investing. And it is a relationship. That's why you have to invest in relationship dynamics. If you have a car, you invest in car dynamics. You put petrol in, you change the tires, you service the car. We cleaned our car yesterday, like properly. So, and it's the same here. In relationships, you invest in relationship dynamics. No use you just, do whatever you want. There are lots of cars in South Africa like that. People just drive them. They're not drivable anymore. So some marriages are like that. They look like one of these Mozambican buckies. Yo, yo, yo. Okay. Any case, so we have to offload all the hundreds and thousands of stuff that you've got in the bag there, and then look after the bucky. So that's you do that through looking at relationship dynamics. And when you look at your relationship dynamics, it comes down to how you treat your partner. How you treat your partner, if I can just give a short summary of last week, how you treat your partner will have an impact on them, and that will also help with how the people interpret your behavior. If you frown like this, I sat in therapy and I was really seriously listening to somebody. I was intently aware of what they were saying and feeling, and saying serious stuff, so I was frowning, and they said, "Are you angry?" What? I was taken aback. I couldn't believe that. I looked angry. Then it reminded me of, or it brought to mind my mother's comment when I was a young boy. One day there'll be a rhino horn coming from the front of your head because you're frowning so much. Jeez, that's the tact of my mother. Any case, so no rhino horn appeared, but the poor fellow thought that I was angry at him. But in fact, I was just listening and actually caring. But that was my message. My non-verbal communication, my body language was communicating. So watch out what your body language is saying. And it's the same with your tone of voice, all the stuff, your facial expression, if you're going to tower over your wife and say, "I'm not screaming," you are. Sit down and speak softer, man. You're talking to your wife. In any case, okay, so it comes down to looking after how you treat your partner. So it's the how. Ad break. I'm writing a book. It's in the house. One day, before I die, I'll finish it. And you'll be able to buy it. So, okay, so the next step is if you look at how you're going to treat your partner, then it comes down to what you say and how you say it. So, if you're going to have fights, and a fight is something where we actually hurt each other. So I like to distinguish fighting from conflict. I named it fair fighting, and now I'm giving it fair conflict. It is not really a fight. A fight is a mud slinging, rock throwing, Mr. and Mrs. Smith shoot each other. That's out to kill. But I'm talking about a healthy conflict, constructive conflict. When it's constructive, it builds something. It's construction. Okay, so it's not destruction. It's okay. So what you want to do there is build something. And the idea with conflict then is you have a disagreement about something, even a disagreement or a dislike in how you were treated. So then you want to discuss it with your partner. And then the mechanics of how you're going to do it is that then where I'm going to put the focus on tonight. So I'm going to give you a summary of my fair fighting workshop. I'm not going to go into all the detail, otherwise I'm going to run out of breath. And you won't have to attend the workshop. And what's the use then of running the workshop if You can hear it all in 1 hour. All right, so the idea here is with conflict here is that I've got a nice quote. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. I'll repeat because it's after 8. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. So you can still have conflict without combat. So let's have a look at how to do that. Now, I usually say sports are just orderly because there are rules. If you have a sport with no rules, then you're like South Africa's government. They have no rules. So they just run the country on their own merits and their own rules. I do hope they don't sue me for that, but they won't have rules for that. Okay, in any case, let me get off politics. The idea here is, I think most South Africans feel that way. But the question then is, how do I play according to the rules? What do I do? Okay, so there are a number of principles you first have to understand. And that is that timing is extremely important. That's the first rule. Pick your battle, but pick the timing. You don't fight on the way to church. You don't initiate the fight. If your partner does something that hurts you and you're on your way to church, I have tried to resolve it, but you know what? Usually the enemy is involved then. He's mostly involved in couples conflicts. It's usually the enemy, the Satan, ja, hy's daar. And then the flesh, that means your own selfish person that was crucified with Christ, if you're a Christian, that still tries to be resurrected. And then the world around you, traffic, the heat, generators, Escom, money, all the stuff around you that can have a pressured impact on your children in the car screaming. Those things add and impact you and affect you. And then what we do is we become edgy with each other. And on the way to church, your partner says something, he's irritable, he says something nasty. And now what do you do now? Okay, so the timing then isn't good. So you can say, you can either, if you have all the skill there and both of you, and you are in the Spirit, that means you're subjected to the Holy Spirit, you are listening to the Lord there, then you might say something there, or you can keep that for after church, and say something. Some people would say, I won't have a good time in church, I will be so upset. But probably you'll have time to pray and think about it and ask the Lord to help you. And that's the point with timing. If it's 6 o'clock at night, children are running through the house, wife's cooking, you don't want to enter into a fight there. I've actually said to my wife, you know what, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, but don't say that in the morning. And now tonight you want to discuss it, but you're going to have her in suspense the whole day. Some torture, baby. No, that's not the idea. You shouldn't torture your wife emotionally like that. That's cruel. Okay, so what you do is you make an appointment. Sometimes what that does is it gives you time to think and pray if you want to discuss something. Yeah, I told you it's not natural. You'll say, but I want to fly off the handle and just say what I feel. It's not fair. He wasn't fair. Okay, he wasn't fair. Yes, he wasn't fair. Doesn't matter. Is that the most important thing to consider? No, it isn't there. I'm just listening to myself, but I just want to check you out your chats. Okay, so the idea here is calm down and pick a time. So I would, and we've actually learned to do this, to say, could we chat about something a bit later? Now that we're more skilled, I might engage in the conflict in a certain sense on the way to church. We might talk somewhat because we're skilled. We don't use all the rules. But if either of us is really emotional, we have to then call a time out and say, okay, what we do then is we say, okay, we love each other, but we're going to talk about it a bit later. Is that okay? Yes. And you can also do that late at night, after 10 o'clock at night. It's difficult. Nah. Half the brain is asleep. How do you expect to have a good fight? Okay, so the idea here is you should then just not have the fight. Okay, so hey Bandile, nice to see that you're joining us. Amelia, it's nice. Okay, so the idea here then is the second step for you is once you've now sorted out the timing, so pick your time. Your partner should also not be watching their favorite show and now you want to do something about, talk. And then your place is important. We like to not have a fight in front of lots of other people where we have an audience. So we rather choose a place that it's a bit more, um, how can we say, it's a bit more private now. All right, so privacy is important, if at all. Don't scream and shout in front of the family, all those things. If you do and your partner's out of control, just keep quiet and excuse yourself. And so the idea is to keep it calm and rather, once you have timing right, you have a place. Some couples do find fighting in public nice, but that's that's the Kardashians. No. So the idea here is to rather fight. When some people would, they would actually go to a restaurant because they know it's going to help them inhibit themselves. If that's the case, then do it, because the idea is that you want to exert self-control, not other control. Okay, then obviously your body language, like I said a bit earlier, it is important how you're going to talk, how you're going to approach your partner. It is not just something that is theoretical. It's really important. Even though you're very angry, you shouldn't always speak in an angry voice. We teach children you have a calm voice, angry voice, a whining voice. You have, all those voices. 80 Brits talks about those things. It's important to rather have a calm voice. If you're angry and you feel justified, not a lot of people listen to you. I don't know. Somebody's angry, screaming. It's hard to hear them. Go to Speaker's Corner in London and see if you want to listen to somebody who's ranting and raving there on the box. No, you want to speak to somebody who speaks sense. And especially if they're angry at you. So it's really difficult. If you are angry, it doesn't mean you have to suppress your feelings. No, say, no, I'm not angry. No, you're angry. And you can say it. You can express your feeling, but you shouldn't. I'm not suppressing. I would say that I'm angry, and I would obviously show it in my face. I'm not going to be false, but there's a way to be angry, and there are levels. It's like a dial of anger. We can dial it up, and or you can just, you can read it in the Bible that God's wrath, boiled up almost, but he still maintained self-control. So that's the point. Okay. Point made. So the idea there is just try to keep your cool, because if you're going to launch the grenade or the missile, then both of you will be at war, and that is not peace. All right, so conflict. What is typical of conflict? What usually happens in conflict is that each person says something that is true, but they leave out important information that is the other person's side of the story. That's usually what happens. And so it's not like you just speak a lot of rubbish there. Yes, Bobsy says no sound. I think there is sound. All right, the idea there is usually you've just got to check that you give both sides of the story, and that's where. So what we also usually find is that each person interprets the events in terms of their own story. So you just interpret events according to how you saw it, and that's where you've got to be open to say, okay, look, this is a dance, both of us, and I do not have the full view. I'm not a 360 camera. I'm not God, actually. I don't have the full view, so I've got to listen to their perspective as well to hear the other side of the story. Yes, sometimes the other person's perspective is skewed, but that's the point here is that most of the times you will find that both of you have a share of truth, and that you can learn something from their side, and that's where humility comes in, for you to also just agree that you are not always right. I think that's one of the things I hear the most in my practice, is that the wives usually will say to me, he's never wrong. He's never wrong. And I've heard that from women as well. Men who say she's just never wrong. She's a knucklehead, She's just so hard in that she won't say sorry. That means she won't take my perspective into account and how I feel and acknowledge that she's had some share in hurting me or in this dance of conflict. Now, if you do that, then you are ready for a nuclear war. Yeah? So you've got to not fight like that. It's not going to work. Okay, and usually what we find is that people start to blame then. They blame. So the idea with blaming is saying, I'm not at fault here in this scenario. I'm the victim, you are the perpetrator. It's your fault. You hurt me. And there's got to be consequences for you. Now, that is usually half the story. That's not. Now, I'm not saying it's not true. It's just that the person's approach is to find the guilty party, and the guilty party must now grovel and say they're sorry. And that is what they should do, but the idea is not to, that's not why you approach conflict. The way why you approach conflict is to say, I want to express myself and I want to be understood and I want to be heard. And maybe I feel hurt and I feel offended and I want to express this with my partner. Why? Not just because I want to feel that they are sorry. Now, you know, when we say sorry, that means I'm sorry that I had that effect on you, that you have now gone through that suffering. I made you suffer in that way. I hurt you. I in some way affected your feelings and your thinking, which is true. And I want to feel better. I want some consolation for that. But also in the relationship, I want some closeness and I want to protect the relationship and restore it. And yes, I want my partner to understand me better. But if you're mature in that sense, then you say, okay, I also want to grow. I also want to understand, is there something that I've done maybe to elicit this? It's not just about me, you see. It's, so that, and initially I found it quite difficult. I was quite sensitive. I found it hard to take feedback. My wife was quite defensive as well. She was and so we got stuck. Neither of us would willingly just say, acknowledge our share. And then we would get stuck in continuously explaining to the other person what our side was. Now, I'm going to show you how to get out of that. Okay, so and then there's the typical side is then that people just focus on what the other person's done, obviously, and not what their own share is. Okay, so and then okay, so before you have a fight, usually when you're in a fight, it's right. Okay, you're in the fight. Now, what do you do now? Now you've got to steer the storm because now it's there. And I'm going to give the skills later. But mostly, if you know there's something bothering you, and I'm going to talk about with your partner, you've got to pray first. You first got to go to the Lord and ask Him to help you, to give you insight, wisdom, to show you what is wrong, what are you doing, what's your share in this. Lord, change my heart. And then I like to forgive. Firstly, so you forgive because before you go and talk, you have to forgive, because forgiveness is something you can give without the other person's apology. Yes, it's harder. But what it does is it clears your heart so that you can talk from a place of more understanding and peace. It's not so easy, but remember the spiritual side of forgiveness. Why do you forgive? Colossians 3 says that forgive as you have been forgiven in Christ, as God has forgiven you. So he says, God says, and it's fair, He has forgiven you of a gazillion sins. So He expects you to forgive your brother, your sister in Christ, your wife, your husband. Now, I know some things are not so easy to forgive, and they are actually quite hurtful and damaging and traumatic, some things. Now, we do distinguish here, but forgiveness nonetheless is something that has to be given, and you know it sets you free. But firstly, it's a choice and it's obedience, and it's love for the Lord. And then the second thing is it also does heal you and it sets you free from what? From revenge, from hate, from the energy that you're expelling or expending here in your heart of mulling over the hurt. Now, recently somebody really said something hurtful to me, and like really, it really hurt me. It wasn't my wife, but wow, it actually took the wind out of my sails for that moment. I trusted the person with something personal, and they just blew me. And when I was whacked at the knees. So I was taken aback, and I've had to go and think about why I felt that way, what hurt me, why was I hurt. I had to open the wound and talk about it with somebody I trusted, my wife, and really go through why I feel so hurt. And sometimes I just have to cry about it. And so it's not always just so easy to say, okay, no, forgiveness is a process too. And sometimes you've got to forgive a lot of times. But okay, now with your husband and wife, the Lord talks about daily forgiveness for everybody, but with them, it's going to be irregular. So you'll also get forgiveness fit, and what will happen but in the end, you are surrendering to the Lord. That's what you're doing, and you're opening yourself up. And then you can also ask advice if it's really a serious stuff. I'd rather go and ask somebody you trust, but like a counselor or whatever, pastor. But now, obviously, that might also affect your partner because you're talking to somebody outside the marriage. So I would rather first go and try and talk to them. Okay, so giving you that input, that is like crucial. And then you say, okay, now there are two approaches they want to follow here. And that's important. Because you can follow an approach where you say, look, I'm just going to blast away. And I call that the court approach, the kaboom. And then there's the home approach where we say, look, this is what I want to do. I want to work at this. Now, sharing some thoughts with you here on various things that you can do. So the first step here, and I like what Jessica has taken my ideas and just given some extra wording to it, and I'm going to use that tonight. So the home approach is what you should do, and the court approach is that don't do this. So the first step you want to do, and this is where we fall into the trap when I'm really upset and angry. Obviously, I want to talk. I want to tell them what I'm feeling and why I'm upset. But your first inclination is to now share what you're saying and why you're feeling upset and stuff. But the first step actually of having conflict is your first motivation should not just be to talk, but it should also be to listen, like I said earlier. But listening to understand. You know that 7 habits of highly effective people, and last week I also said St. Francis, who said we tend to listen. We should listen in order to really understand, not just to be heard. But it's both. You are going to talk and you're going to share your heart. So you approach your partner, you ask them if you can have some time with them and talk to them. There is something that's hurting you and bothering you. And the idea here is then to explain to them when they did something here, when they did A, and this is Henry Cloud and John Townsend's ideas, when you did A, it affected me B. So it's the effect that I want to share with you. Would you rather do C because it will affect me D? Now, the idea here is to explain to them how that's a scenario or a situation affect you. The idea is not to tell them how useless and rubbish they are. That's not the idea. You can do that, but I don't really know whether that's going to help. But okay, so listening and understanding. What the court approach does, because what do people do in court? They pitch up there with their defense lawyers, and then there's a prosecutor. And then in the end, there's a judge who sits there and says, you're right, you're wrong, go and pay that body so much and get out of here. So the idea there is not reconciliation. The idea is to say, you win, you lose, you're right, you're wrong. Now, in a sense, when we have conflict, we are going to see who's right and who's wrong, or who did that and who did what. And the idea is to take ownership. But that's not the only idea. The idea is not really to blame somebody and make them feel bad because they hurt you and take your anger out on them. Because I had a client like that. She blames her husband and then she expects her husband to understand her. But she's like going on and attacking him. So the idea is not to attack. Now I'm really talking to couples here who are not who are reasonable. I'm not talking about the bell curve. We have those ends. The couples who are, I'm not talking about the real narcissistic, hectic, traumatic, abusive relationships, because those I will address in March when I have a series on narcissism and those things. But for now, I'm talking about the more reasonable people who are willing to have conflict and want to grow and, And those people. And yes, we do have different personalities, and we do have all those things. I spoke about that last week. In the end, it comes down to how you treat each other. So when you have the court approach, the idea is not to listen. The idea is to be heard and to actually force the other person to hear you. So you interrupt them because they're wrong and you're right. Now, when that other person speaks to you, they are sharing their heart. They are sharing, remember, their perspective of it too. And I'm not giving you the culture's your truth. No, not that. They're just sharing what is their perspective on it. It is not the full picture, obviously, but what you want to do is you want to hear them and listen to what they're saying and give them the courtesy of really understanding them. Why? Because that's what you're going to ask them to do for you too. If you're not going to do that, if you're going to interrupt them and dismiss them, you are going to elicit from them more defensiveness, because now you are breaking up. Now, I'm not talking about if you are going to share your heart with your spouse and you speak for 2.5 hours and you expect them to listen all the time because Erich said you should listen, then you can expect the other party to fall asleep. You're going to be a sedative to them. So I'd rather not do that. So the idea is also just to share your heart, but then to listen, because this is about love. It's about loving each other. It's about getting what is in the way of our intimacy, really growing here. And I'm not being soft, soapy here. We're just going to be tough and, what's this? Do you want a close relationship or not? If you want a close relationship, a real happy marriage, then do this. If you don't want to, then fight on. Okay, that's now for the hard-headed people. Okay, so then the second step is that you explain yourself. You don't blame. So the other one is that you don't give your partner a chance to speak. You blame them. You just give them a hard time. You interrupt them. So you explain. And then the third one is you're giving feedback to them. You're giving and you're receiving feedback. So the idea there is feedback means that's what the other person has now heard you say. So you usually want to share your thoughts. So the person is speaking to you, you're listening, and when you're speaking, you're explaining what you're feeling and how it's affected you. And that is actually got feedback in it for the other person. Now, usually what I teach people there is to summarize when they're listening to that partner, to tell them what they've heard them say. Why? Because we tend to listen, with one ear, and that's the one part. We listen with our own perceptions. We've got lots of noise. So when we summarize what we've heard, we also give the other person the genuine message that I have heard you. And you can also make sure that you have actually heard them. You know how many times in facilitating couples, the one person shares this, and now it's a sensitive thing. They have gone around this mountain hundreds of times, and they've not been able to sort it out. So it is not easy. And they're sitting with a lot of emotion. So it's difficult. So therefore, all the more reason to apply this. So the first person would share, and the second person, then I would ask them to summarize. And they'd find it so difficult to really hear just what that person said, because they want to say what they think about this. So you've got to summarize and really hear, and then the person will say to you, yes, you've heard me correctly, or no, this is what I meant there, or there's some misunderstanding. Then you clear it up until they've heard you. Otherwise, well, you would continue speaking and they would continue listening, but you're not on the same message here. The theory says the message that is sent is not the message that's received. And that's obviously not going to lead to clarity and understanding. Okay, so then, once you've heard them, you can now show empathy, you can show understanding. You take ownership for your share. You don't have to take ownership for everything. You just take ownership for what is your part in this. And then what you do is you apologize. And now go and have a look at the 5 languages of apology, various types of apology. But one of the key things in apology is to acknowledge what you've done and how it's affected the other person. And then ask them, is there any way that I can make this better for you? It's not to make it up to you. That's the idea. But the idea is to make it better. Because I've impacted you. I've hurt you. Okay, and then the other person usually If it's the court approach, what that person would do is they would just ignore you, they won't listen to you, they would interrupt you, and they would be defensive, and they would just not offer an apology. They would just give another justification or another blame. No, it wasn't me, it was you. You did that, you did this, no, you did that. And then the thing just goes, and then it escalates usually. Did you know that the highest form of escalation is physical fights? Okay, so then the fifth point here for the home approach is that you offer forgiveness. Meaning, if the other person's apologized, you express forgiveness. You say, thank you for your apology. I accept it all. Because you can accept an apology right there. You don't have to feel better to accept it. Otherwise, you're going to keep the person hanging and they're in suspense, and you're just torturing them for a while. That's not going to work. And then the last one of the last parts here is that you share your feelings. Yes. You share what your thoughts are, and the other. It's just interesting. You prescribe to them when you're in the court. You bomb them. You ambush them. You stonewall them. Stonewalling means silent treatment. They just hit the stone wall. You don't listen. You just walk away when they're talking. You just say, I'm always the one who's to blame in this house. I heard that. Actually heard that from a couple. And then you storm out, or you jump in your car, you run away. That means you're sabotaging the process. You're taking control. And usually it's in a defensive manner to somebody else's blame, who's just taking this situation and saying it's all your fault. Okay, so that's not going to work, obviously, but people still do it. And then the sixth part here is when you've actually requested, now you've asked them, you've explained to them, when you did A, it affected me B, now you're going to request something else. Would you rather do C, because that would affect me D? So you're requesting a new kind of treatment behavior, and you're explaining to them what it would mean to you if they can either fulfill this need, or they can stop doing that, or they can do something else. What would it mean to you? How would it affect you? Why do you do that? Because you make them understand. They understand you better. You're more vulnerable. They can hear you, and usually that draws you closer. And then the other person would acknowledge that if you've not thrown 100 bricks at them, if you're in the unfair or the unfair treatment, what in the court, what you would do there is you would use that vulnerability against them, and you would just say, but yes, you would use something to blame them again, or to make them feel guilty, or to say, yes, you want me to do that, but you're not doing this, so you're weighing up and you're just blaming again. That's just going to get, because there's not a judge in your house. Nobody's going to say, you're right, you're wrong, okay, there you go. So here on this side, when you've requested something else, you've requested them to act differently, to treat you differently, what you then can do is you can work it out. You can say, and what would work for you? So once this person's spoken, the other person's now heard. That person, obviously, once they've summarized, they also want to share their feelings, and they also want to explain their side of the story and where they come from. And this person then listens and gives them understanding. And this person explains, not blames. So if both parties do this, then it works lacquer. If only one party does this, usually the case, the other one is in the court, the one is in the home, it's going to be very difficult. It is. No joking. It's going to be hard. And it's not going to go smooth. It's going to be a rough road. It's like driving with two wheels on a four-wheel drive track and two wheels on a tar road. It sucks. So it will be a very unstable, bumpy affair. And the person who's in the home approach will actually have to become more assertive to protect themselves, because the person in the court approach is just throwing bricks. So you've got to protect yourself in a sense, but I'm not saying that you've got to go to the court. You've just got to become more assertive, meaning you stand up for yourself there, and it's again a dial of assertiveness. You escalate it a bit more, where you say, no, this is not acceptable, but this is more, and then no. And you request different behaviors. You request a timeout, or you say, I can see you're not calm, and when you're not calm, I'm struggling to explain this to you. Now, some couples would say, yes, but my husband doesn't. No, he doesn't listen to me. I've got to wait for him until the next morning, check out his mood. And it's a pity. Some you have to dance around him and his moods and his feelings, and then you have to like approach him from this angle. And I know that's the way you've learned to cope in that relationship, and it's helped you, and you've gotten to some point there, and it's because of that person's insecurity or inability to communicate their feelings or listen, or because they're stumped in a sense. I understand that. So you are going to do some work, but this will heighten your skill, and you can request from your partner to develop these skills. I mean, it's not unreasonable. Now, I know not all partners are psychologists and want to grow, and not that all psychologists want to grow. That's also not true. But the idea is that not all people are psychologically minded and spiritually active and want to know the Lord and please Him. So I understand it's very hard when you have a couple or a partner that is not into this and that's just doing it their way. So it is difficult, but the hope is there that once you approach them differently, at least that has a different effect on them. And it does show interest, it shows respect. Now, I'm not talking about, again, about the traumatic ones where there's like hitting and verbal and emotional abuse. There's another video for that, boundaries and abuse. Go and have a look at that. So the idea here is for you to keep coming back to the home approach. So if you find yourself in the court, apologize. So I realize I've just been blaming you. If you need a moment, ask them. Say to them, I need to take a few moments. Just calm down, because your responsibility is how you act. Their responsibility is their behavior. Yes, if they're going to do something, and you have a choice on how you're going to react. You know that. Okay, so in the end here, what we want to get to is a place where both parties are heard and they've shared their feelings and they both understand, they make sure they understand each other, and then take ownership for their share in this. Usually, it's got to do with 50-50, usually, or 70-30 or whatever. Sometimes it's 100-0. It happens, and then, then you don't have to say you're sorry or whatever for something you didn't do. You never have to do that. But what you can also then do is express your love. You can even do that way in the beginning. Express your love. It's not manipulative. You say, I love you and I care about you. And if you're really furious, you can say, I'm so furious I do feel like clapping you, But I'm not going to do that now. I am going to, I'd like to share my heart with you. So the more authentic, the more real it becomes. Yes, the more threatening it does feel to some people, but you get used to that idea, because the idea here is that both of you have to agree that we want to work at developing a safe space between us. If it's only one person, it is going to be difficult to do that. It is. But at least if you're the influencer, you're moving it in that direction. Doesn't mean that your partner will end up there, but it's at least moving. And if you're the court approach, you're influencing the relationship to end up in the court. But sometimes your perseverance will pay off. So the idea here is then in the end to get to the place where you love. So you're loving. Look at Philippians 2 verse 1 and 2. It says, therefore, if there's any encouragement in Christ, can you see who's the author, the source of your encouragement? If there's any consolation of love, his love for you, that'll help you to love your partner even though they don't act lovingly now. If there's any fellowship of the Spirit, so the Holy Spirit's important, the fellowship, you can see the in tune with Him. If any affection and compassion, can you see that's the approach towards your partner? Make my joy complete by being of the same mind. So that's where you're working towards. Maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Can you see? And this is not written just for married couples, it's for the church, but that's the idea. To work towards same mind, same love. So the idea is both parties are responsible for the Lord. But if you're the only person working at this, at least you're listening to the Lord and He's pleased. And then the rest of the verses go on and says, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. Check your motives when you want to go and have a conflict, that it's not just about you. You also want to hear. But with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Whoa, that's difficult. Now, I must be honest, I don't know if I always get that one right, but this approach at least will help. To regard the other person as more important than yourself. Yeah, that's a high bar, but the idea there is that you try. Verse 4 says, do not merely look out for your own personal interests, again, but also for the interests of others. Can you see how it's balanced? So you're not going to look out for your personal interests, but you're also going to look out for their interests. You're going to talk about your perspective. You're going to ask their perspective. You're going to share what you think is your hurts and your feelings, and and you're going to listen to theirs, and you're going to share what it is that you need or what you want differently, and you're going to listen to what they want to need. Now, some people have fights, and in the beginning we were like this. Now, if she said something to me that hurt me, now I've got to say something too. But that hurt me. You said that yesterday. No, we stick to one topic at a time. Because now that you've said something, I've done something wrong, I've harbored 6 other things that you've done wrong, and I want to add them all now. No, stick to one topic at a time. Yes, there might be some other things that you also want to share, but it doesn't always have to just be an equal thing. Now you've hurt me and I've said sorry, and now I've got to bring something to the table too. Or you're just the one person who just never share because you're so holy in the sense that you just, everything's just fine. No, it's not fine. You can be genuine, and you can just say, I'm sorry, but just be real. And then the verse 5 says, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. So that's the attitude that counts, that attitude of, listen, I want to hear you, but I also want to share. And you see that in how God interacts with people. He does share his feelings. He's not just he doesn't just harm himself by being so quiet. And then Romans 12 verse 17 and 18 says, if someone has done you wrong, do not repay him with the wrong. Okay, so that's now the court approach. Don't go in there. Try to do what everyone considers to be good. Everyone, like the Christians, what do they consider to be good? Do everything possible on your part to live in peace with everybody. So you've got to try from your part. Now, it in this scripture then also implies that it is not always possible. Even though you try everything from your part to live in peace with everybody, it's not all possible. Forget that. And then it does say in Hebrews 12, continually, verse 14, pursue peace with everybody. So it is, the Lord really does want us to work at this. And it says, it couples this with a very serious thing, and the sanctification without which nobody will see the Lord. I mean, it's like serious stuff in the sense that, I'm not saying it's not salvation by works, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the Lord wants us to work at this. So, okay, so the idea here then in the end is for you to work at the how you're going to work at this. And remember the steps. What we're going to do is I'll share that picture, that image with you on Facebook, and you can see the do's and the don'ts. And then you can start to work at your own perspective here and at your own words. Now, I obviously cannot go into much detail here at the literal wording of explaining certain things and the do's and the don'ts there. That's in the workshop. So that's where we go into wordings and how to express this, how to not express, and why, and the impact, and all those things we have a look at there. But this is really the nutshell of thinking about conflict. And the idea is then to develop the home approach and to work at that. Once me and Elsie both agreed that we needed to do this, and I must tell you, it has just catapulted our relationship. But it is built upon the sensitivity to the Lord and really being open to Him working with you and talking to you. And so that's it. I think I've shared a whole lot tonight. If you want to, you can leave some questions and whatever. And also remember to go and visit our YouTube channel, and we're on Instagram too, and even on TikTok. Okay, great stuff. So go and have a look at our website for all our workshops as well for the year. We've got quite a number of them lined up. Upcoming workshops, we're talking about trauma debriefing skills for lay counselors, fair fighting 1 and 2, and I'm planning some workshops on a woman's worth for women and their body image and self-image and depression and all those things. So we were talking about those possibilities. But in any case, great stuff. It was lovely spending time with you. Yes, great stuff. Blessings. Bye.